Hello, and welcome to Breakaway, Leadership for a Sound Mind and Body, brought to you by the University of Michigan Leadership Collaborative, a community dedicated to advancing leadership learning across the university for students who seek to develop and progress as leaders. I'm James McCrae, and I'm your guide on this podcast journey. In this series, we're asking you to break away from the norms of your daily routines to explore the challenges that leaders face in developing healthy habits that fuel the mind and body. So I'm inviting you to take this opportunity to do something that you consider active while we engage you mentally. Now, let's join our amazing guests as we break away.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We are the Sanger Leadership Center, joining you today on this podcast here to talk about the Michigan Model of Leadership, which is a research-backed model that's used across the University of Michigan and really prominent at the Sanger Leadership Center, which we are housed at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan, and really excited to be here today. So just an introduction about who I am. My name is Jeff Domagala. I serve as Managing Director of the Sanger Leadership Center. Also wear a couple hats. I'm an adjunct lecturer in our Management Organizations Department. Also serve as a certified leadership coach. And I'm here joined by one of our students that's very involved with our center. So I want to say hello.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Bizzy Webb. I am a junior undergraduate student right now studying business at Ross, concentrating in marketing and strategy with also a dual minor in entrepreneurship and moral and political philosophy. And like Jeff mentioned, I am a student ambassador for the Sanger Leadership Center. So I champion all of the work we do with a bunch of undergraduates and graduate students across the University of Michigan at large, champion different leadership development programs for students, and just overall serving as an ambassador for the program and everything that we do from all of the different programmatic opportunities. But today I'm super excited to talk a little bit about the foundation of what Sanger Leadership Center is, which is the Michigan Model of Leadership. And so, Jeff, I would love if you could tell us a little bit about what the Michigan Model of Leadership is, and more specifically, what it is used for.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I'm going to first start by just saying what we do at Sanger. Our mission is accelerating leader development through bold ideas, transformative experiences, and inclusive communities. And I wanted to just start by saying accelerating because we recognize that everyone is a leader. Everyone's on that journey of becoming a leader. The Michigan Model of Leadership is a behavioral theory of leadership. It states that leadership is a result of learned skills and that fundamentally leaders are made. They're not born. And so what the model is, it builds upon the competing values framework, which was developed by Bob Quinn, Kim Cameron, and other Michigan faculty. But the competing values framework is now the foundation for consulting practices, executive education courses, and numerous leadership development programs. What's really powerful about it is actually in 2003, the Financial Times recognized the model as one of the 40 most important management frameworks in history. And so what I think is important to stand still by is that the Michigan model, it acknowledges that this fundamental paradox of leadership that's tied to two key tensions found in all organizations. One is how to balance the tension between collaborating and driving results. So collaborating in our model is a yellow quadrant, driving results is the blue quadrant. And then this other, which is how to balance the tension between structure, which is our red quadrant, and innovation, which is our green. And so navigating these tensions and achieving the appropriate balance for folks is really what's important to optimize teams, organizations, and that's really the goal of leadership. And so there's different levels we think about this from an analysis perspective, but understanding each of those tensions and being able to get better at those is what we think about all the time, and that's what a leader's job is to do.
Awesome, Jeff. Thank you so much for sharing. And I love the piece that you brought up about acceleration and how this model can be applied to different forefronts, whether you're working at an organization, whether you're a student, getting your undergraduate degree, whatever it may be, and how you're kind of meeting people where they're at in their leadership journeys. And it's an active document for students to work on kind of throughout their journey, as well as organizational journeys as well. So could you get a little bit more specific kind of about the quadrants of the Michigan model? What kind of skills are needed or levels of analyses within providing structure, driving results, collaboration, and innovation?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think just diving into the tensions that we mentioned, I think let's just take a look at the green and the red quadrant. So if we're talking about providing structure and innovation, that tension illustrates that like urgency, right? With leaders that must establish stability, control, integration, right? Standards of processing, procedures, right? Well, that's often at tension with our ability to drive change, pursue innovation, think differently, learn. If we're always learning and creating new things, we can't ever build that structure. But if we're too rigid and too focused on the structure, there's no room for new, right? And so it's about how do we balance those two and the need to partner amongst folks who have different strengths and skill sets. On the flip side, the tension between collaboration and driving results, on the collaboration side, we're thinking about things like harmony. We're thinking about positive relationships, collaboration, team cohesion, all while competing with this tension of driving effort, goal achievement, pushing forward results. Same thing there. If we're always focused on results, what about people? What about the folks that get it done? I think we saw this really well articulated and we all experienced through the pandemic and COVID, which was we still got to get the work done, but people were burned out. People were tired. People felt something that they hadn't felt before. And so that need to slow down and to be with people, to spend time, to get to know what the challenges are. That's what this model is about, is breaking down some of those tensions. So you mentioned, some of the pieces of this that make it come to life. What's really interesting about each of these four quadrants, whether it's collaboration, innovation, providing structure, or driving results, is that we do this in different ways. Leading self, leading teams, and leading organizations. And so what is required within just one skill set of collaboration when we're talking about, let's just take the yellow quadrant of collaboration. When we are thinking about that, leading self, that might mean having empathy for others. That might mean building a meaningful relationship. So that's just self, like giving yourself the opportunity to be better, right? When it comes to leading a team, it might be ability to be inclusive, ability to communicate to large groups. And the yellow quadrant around collaboration, if we're talking about leading organizations, that might mean around how do I build a culture, an engaged workforce, a high-performing team that's about developing talent. So you can see across each of those skill levels, right? The skills are different across what a leader is required to do. And so that's what we love most about this model, whether you're an undergraduate student, a graduate student, a leader of an organization, or a team, anybody can use these frameworks and we're always learning and growing. And so I think that's what's really exciting about some of these tensions.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you brought up the tiered system of, leading yourself, leading teams, and leading organizations, and the versatility of the model of no matter where you are at your career or schooling journey, that it can be applied to you and your leadership styles. And so I'm curious because there's a lot of different leadership frameworks, especially at Michigan, that students might encounter. So how is this, Michigan model of leadership differing from those practice models that are already kind of on the market here?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's lots of models out there, right? I think when a lot of our students here at the University of Michigan might be familiar with StrengthsFinder, the Strengths Quest assessment that helps people understand talent and strength. Myers-Briggs typology indicator, CQ, our cultural assessment. So whatever the assessment is, alongside the Michigan model of leadership, all of those are tools to better understand who we are at our core. What are our strengths? What is our natural ability as it relates to something? So regardless of what it is, it's what I have to say about it is that the Michigan model of leadership does not overlap perfectly on any one other model. Many folks have tried to do it, and it's tricky because they're different, right? The Michigan model of leadership pulls out some of the tensions that exist across teams and organizations. The Michigan model of leadership is based in over 60 plus years of research, and it's used in a variety of places. And so I'd say it differs from those elements, but it also has the different dimensions of tension. And so the ability, we like to say, in order to be a well-rounded leader, you've got to at least have average capability in all four quadrants, right? To
Yeah.
be that well-rounded leader. And so it requires this ability to try out new leadership behaviors, skills, ways of practicing, which really requires experimentation.
Yeah, I love that. And also to provide a little bit more light too on kind of like the Michigan model of leadership assessment too, kind of as a student. I know that we're going to talk a little bit about how it's benefiting students in real life situations, but I think you've provided a great framework of each of the four quadrants. But, a lot of people are probably wondering and asking, like, how does this apply to me and where can I see where I sit kind of on this model? And so just kind of wanted to plug that we do, as Sanger Leadership Center, put out the actual assessment. And so you will go in and it only takes about 5 minutes or so, and it's an online assessment, and you can gauge through different strategic questions that they will be asking you where you sit kind of on the collaborative pieces versus driving results versus innovation and providing structure. And that gives you a really great benchmark to see where you fall in the Michigan model of leadership. And I also think it's so important over time, whether it be your schooling or whether it be leading an organization, to continually take this assessment and see how you are improving over time on each of these four quadrants. And so kind of going off of that, and now giving a little bit of light of how students and, professional workers can really apply this, in their day-to-day lives. I'm curious how you've seen the Michigan model of leadership benefit students specifically in real life situations.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that it changes because
Yeah.
as we change, our leadership style changes based on the context or the situation in which we are leading. I know you're asking about students,
Yeah.
but I know even for me, like my strengths have looked different based on the context in which I am leading. Is it a team? Is it
Right.
myself? Is it a peer? And so that looks different. So for students, that's similar, right? So I think we see all the time that this is extremely beneficial, first of all, in understanding who I am as a leader. So fundamentally and foundationally, we help our students really self-assess by taking the self-assessment of where do I currently fall? What are my
Yeah.
natural strengths, abilities? And to be able to know that is really, in order to lead people, we've got to be able to lead ourselves first. And so that's setting that foundation, having that point of origin before you can have any sort of destination after that. From there and student teams. When a student team is coming together for the first time, we always ask them like, hey, had you had the conversation about like what are your strengths? What are you working on? Who has skill set in a certain area? Does anyone want to try something new? And so all of our teams that we help students with, it's helping them think through how do you have that conversation before diving into the project, before driving results? That's really key. So whether you're leading a club, whether you're leading an organization, whether you're engaging with a peer, whether you have to have a difficult conversation, we invite folks to take the self-assessment first. And then I always encourage students to think about this, use this model as a toolkit, right? To say, based on the needs of the moment, which quadrant are we struggling with? Which quadrant do we have natural skill set and ability? And so I know listeners can't see the model in this moment, but what's really beautiful about it is that if you're looking at the yellow quadrant, in that yellow quadrant has the opposite color arrow. So in the yellow quadrant, there's a blue arrow. In the blue quadrant, there's the yellow arrow. To remind folks that in order to drive results, you've got to bring people along. In order to collaborate, you're moving forward a goal. And so there's different ways of going about it. And so we give students those couple of examples, right? If you're working on a team for the first time and let's say someone has hardship in their life, right?
Yeah.
It's not probably the best time to say like, well, buckle up and let's keep going. It's an opportunity to lean into that yellow quadrant and say, how are you doing? How can we support? What do you need, right? And so it's that human element that helps us drive results in a lot of ways too.
Yeah. And I love what you said kind of about the specific colors of the arrows. I think grounding me specifically and other people who have looked at the model of like, you can't just have one. You have to have every single piece to lead an effective team. And it actually brings up an important kind of experience and learning opportunity that I've had in one of my classes is a couple years ago in my business communications class at Ross. We had class the day after the Michigan State shooting, actually, and we had a huge assignment and deliverable due that next day. And my professor, instead of like to your point, saying, buckle up, okay, we've got to get this done. We spent the entire time talking about, what happened and how she could support us the next day after. And I think that's a really important leadership quality and how she was able to be agile and shift to kind of current events and collaborate with us and kind of put the driving results piece to the wayside. And so that was something that really stuck out to me, especially when you were kind of saying that and talking about it. So I appreciate
love
that piece.
You said that. Yeah, I think it's really important when we find that, like, what is at the core of this? What are we trying to do? One, this is our fundamental framework on the type of leader that we develop. And at its core, if you can do all of these things, you are adaptable.
Yes.
You are doing the work that is hard to be able to move in the moment to say, you know what, this is what we need to do. Here's our plan. But right now, I'm sensing this.
Right.
And right now, we're going to pivot. And so being able to have a plan is what is at the core of what provides structure means. But it's also being able to innovate and drive a result, but it's at the core of what people need. Yeah. And so being able to flex that muscle as a leader to adapt, but also change your plan and change that course of action is what we want. We want to train our students to help them be resilient in those moments that are challenging.
Yeah, exactly. No, I love what you said. And I also have kind of another experience using the Michigan model of leadership specifically as a student that I'd like to bring up a little bit, and kind of a shameless plug too for the crisis challenge because that Sanger puts on, because it kind of goes into that experience. But every year I'll just provide a little bit of light. But the Sanger Center puts on a crisis challenge in January, and you're put on a random team of, I believe it's 6 or 7 students. And I participated in the undergraduate challenge last year, and I was immersed into basically a tech crisis and put on a team. We had a very, very diverse team. It was awesome. We had 2 students from Spain who are international exchange students studying at the business school. We had 3 students who were actually in the engineering school, and then me and one of my good buddies who are in the business school, me kind of focusing more on marketing and then my buddy focusing more on finance. So hailing from very, very different interests and occupations across the university at large. But essentially what the crisis challenge was is we were basically, not to say locked basically in Ross for like 6 hours one night. We got emails and phone calls, and it was all, the crisis was unfolding in live time, and we had to come together and come up with a solution to the crisis. And there were phishing threats to our business and a bunch of legal things that we had to consider. And so I think what was interesting is I'm a very, very innovative person, and so I was coming in the room and I got all of the markers out on the whiteboard and was saying like all these creative things that we could do and put our minds together to like achieve, because we had a board pitch the next day at the Michigan Stadium that we had to prep for. And then a couple of my other teammates like looked at me and they were like, Bizzy, like, we do not have time for this. Like, what are you doing drawing on the board over there? And so I think that was just kind of a testament a little bit about to my more like curious and innovative nature that really drives me, and how like at the end of the day, we really needed structure because we were immersed in a crisis challenge. And we needed to drive results because we really only had 4 hours to basically take this business who was undergoing a tech crisis and ensure that all of our communications across all of our different stakeholders were solid and sound so we could have a comprehensive pitch for the next day. And so I think that was a little bit of an example of like the model of leadership and how I strayed a little bit more on the side of innovation, and how some of my other teammates were more on the providing structure. And I think having my teammates be that lifeline for me to like push this into perspective of like, oh, Busy, like, let's have some structure here. Let's not like write all of the potential things that we could do on the board and actually ground ourselves was really, really helpful, specifically like in the leading teams kind of threshold of the leadership model. So that's another kind of experience that I've personally had with a Sanger program where the Michigan model of leadership has come to life.
Yeah, I love that you're like drawing on some of those tensions, right? Because
Yeah.
that's exactly how it shows up. It's like, but if folks don't have that conversation and say, Busy, what are you doing? Right?
Yeah.
Those are the fundamental underpinnings of why, teams fail or why organizations have challenges. We don't say, hey, what is the process that we need right now?
Yeah.
And then when are we moving to that next process? And when are we unlocking a different skill set that we need that requires different people's strengths and different styles to come out?
Right. And I think your piece earlier that you said about like, having the Michigan model of leadership discussion on the onset before you actually get into some of those team discussions would have been so helpful, I think, for our team. And now just reflecting on so many team projects that I've had within the business school. I'm currently in the Ross Integrative semester right now, or RIS semester, and I basically am managing projects on 7 different student-led teams across my classes. And a lot of the times our professors will have us do team charters. And so that's so helpful and kind of integrates the Michigan model of leadership philosophy behind it of like, what is each of our team members bringing to the table? What are our goals? And also like, when we come to our meeting, like, let's actually have deliverables that we need to meet. And then each person who has different values and different strengths, whatever quadrant it may be, can add those to this discussion. So I think the onset piece that you were talking about of doing at the forefront is so helpful and would have provided some more structure and clarity, I think, in the crisis challenge situation specifically.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you brought that up because that's why we do it, right? We get a little bit of eye rolls when it's like, all right, pull out that team charter.
Yeah.
But we sort of say, have this conversation now, because if you don't, it's gonna lead to some potential barriers, challenges, conflicts, tensions, and maybe some courageous conversations that people aren't ready to have yet. And so being able to have that conversation first really does set that team up for success.
Yeah. And just kind of pulling back for a second here, I'm curious, like, from your experience, like, what kind of personal and professional skills would you say students can kind of expect to develop through the model?
That's a great question. There's so many, and I think that's what's exciting about this is that if a student wants to focus on self, they can. If they're coming in with a focus on teams, that's great. That self-assessment really is that starting point to understand where do you fall, and then all of our programs that we offer are all aligned 100% to these skills. And so, if you wanted to focus from meaningful relationships to developing curiosity to building that resilience muscle to also building efficiency on a team, like you were talking about, the role clarity and the team processes, but also what does it mean to build structure, have agility, build team inclusion, what does it look like to have influence on a team? And so all of these skill sets are going to be exercised in some way. It is really, though, up to the student or the learner, whoever you are, to decide, what do I want to work on? First, I have to identify what is the skill that I want to work on.
Yeah.
Now, we've got on the model, you can choose your own adventure, if you will, on the type of skill that you want to develop. But once you have that, for us, it's then, we like to say, run an experiment. And so for us, what does that mean? Well, if I wanted to get better at, let's say, I wanted to become better at getting curious.
Yeah.
I would develop a hypothesis. What my hypothesis be is if I took a moment to get curious before I started speaking, then my team might have better results and I might feel more confident. That's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
Now, the goal of the hypothesis is then to run the experiment. When am I going to do it? and be on the team in a team setting, when I'm speaking to a group, when I might have formal authority as a leader, and then get some feedback. How did I do? Ask people. And we find that from research even says that when you feed forward and ask people, hey, I'm working on this skill, how did I do? We find that folks having taken that ownership, they actually perform better and they're seen as more effective because they're running this leadership experiment. And so we encourage all of our students to run this experiment. And so we've got the Sanger Leadership Journey, which is a 5-step framework for developing self-coaching, right? Which is identify your point of origin, which is knowing your strengths, your skill sets, running these experiment cycles, and then over the course of time, you're becoming a guide for others when you develop this skill. And so we really find that that's a really helpful tool to help flex these different muscles as it relates to these skills when these skills are unfamiliar or when you have had no experience with the skills.
Yeah. And I love the kind of hypothesis statements that you brought up of the if-then statements. I think that's a really great framework to kind of add into the Michigan model of leadership and allows students to actually have actionability in each of these different pieces. I think one example from my experience as a club leader, I'm currently the president of an organization on campus. It's called Ross Retail Club, connecting students with luxury and retail careers. And basically, I got appointed as president as a sophomore in undergrad and was completely kind of just thrown into the position. I had no prior experience to really being a president or in that high of a leadership position before. And basically, I wanted to add a bunch of different positions to our executive board. And we currently had, when I came on, about 5 members or so. And I saw the need I wanted a sustainability chair and a philanthropy chair. And I wanted to expand our content team. So I wanted an Instagram chair and TikTok chair and all of these things. And so really hitting on that kind of collaborative piece. And I wanted everyone to be a part of the family. And now kind of reflecting as I've had about a year of leadership experience as president of Ross Retail Club, our executive board is now like 25 people, which is a lot of leadership. So I'm basically leading our whole executive team, but also we went from 50 members to now 300 general members. So a lot of like fast-paced growth. But with that, it's been really hard sometimes I found to drive those results with that big of a team. And so that's been a really, really big learning and growth moment for me with the synergy kind of coming in between collaboration and driving results, because I thought, we need all of these things and we need a huge executive team, but then sometimes the message and the brand value can get a little bit lost when you have a team that big. And so I think that's a little bit of a tension piece that I've had personally in club leadership and leading teams with that collaborative and driving results piece in the model. That's been kind of interesting to grow and see as I've now coming up over a year of being president of this organization.
So you just gave an example that didn't use an if-then statement, but you really had one, right? If I grow my executive board, might we be able to get more members, achieve better things, have greater brand presence? That's what I'm just hearing you say, right? And so you ran that experiment.
Yes.
I'm hearing it had mixed results, some good and some they're still learning. But I think you proved a really good point that we all do this every day.
Yeah.
What we want to help folks do is that just become aware of it.
Yeah.
Reflect, introspect. What could be different if you act differently? And so that's a part of the learning process of becoming a leader that's more effective over time.
Exactly. And I think to that point too, it's like you're not ever going to know unless you try. And so it comes with some of that, courageous nature as well of like, sometimes you just got to dive in and see what works and then reevaluate. And I loved what you said specifically about reflection. I think especially for me and after talking to a lot of students on campus, that sometimes is the hardest piece to achieve because we're going, in any career you're in actually, you're going so fast all of the time. and you rarely have time to sit down and reflect of like, oh, I actually just made this change in my organization, or I treated this person differently in an interaction, and that changed the result. And what do I think about that? Because I feel like we're living in such a fast-paced world that sometimes gets overlooked, and that's so incredibly important, and also speaks to the live action nature of the Michigan model of leadership and how it's important to continue to reassess where you're at and really track your growth.
Yeah, and I think the best leaders are reflective. They know who they are. They know what went well. They know how they can improve. And I think folks often ask, like, how do I reflect? When do I reflect? What do I ask myself? And it doesn't have to be profound. Yeah. I think it could be, we're all walking to places, we're driving in cars, we're moving from one place to the next, but we're all walking really fast when I look around. It's just taking that moment to say, I like to use stop, start, continue. Yeah. What could I stop doing that's not making me effective? What could I start doing in which I could become more effective? And what could I continue doing that's working really well? If you just ask that stop, start, continue, it's a really great framework, a tool that can be helpful in relationships, individually, on teams and organizations, that prompts further exploration of what's possible.
Yeah, I love that. And I think another point on the reflection and feedback point that's been really helpful for me as a leader too is I'll put actually reminders on my phone every month. And in all of my leadership positions on campus, I remind myself to send an email or a text message out to everyone who's on my executive board or functioning kind of under my leadership to actually send me their feedback on how I'm doing. Nice. And that's so incredibly helpful because you get those perspectives of, who's actually working under you and what's working well for them and what's not. Because some things that I may think is amazing and working well for everyone, I may find that, that's actually not what the people on my team want and what they see or value in my leadership. And that also allows me to be a little bit more agile and figure out also on the model of leadership of like, what do I need to focus in on and what can I improve on personally? So I think that's another piece, like aside from self-reflection, is also just asking those around you who are working on teams with you and working under you of like what they're valuing you and your leadership and what you can improve on. So that's another piece.
And I think having that mirror be reflected back to you, the folks that see you at your best and see areas that you can improve. It's good to have folks around you to be able to give you that insight, to know where to go next. And I think that's oftentimes the first moments we have to begin reflecting.
Yeah, and I think that would be what is so special about a depth of understanding with the Michigan model of leadership is, if you're able to flesh this out on a team that you're working on, people can have an understanding and pinpoint what areas on the quadrants that you're really excelling at and what areas maybe you need some more work on. So I think also that speaks to the importance of having people who work under you or on your teams or in your organizations be able to actually utilize this model so they understand where you are really excelling and where you might be falling short and how you can work together on a team to really achieve really excellent results.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think, you started to pick up on I'm really glad you're sharing your experience because I think there's a lot of folks that are eager to, I don't say eager, but might be like, I don't know about this model, right? And so what I'm hearing from you is that it's widely applicable. Yeah. It's something, think about this. Like in any profession, you're going to have to collaborate. You're going to have to drive a result. You're going to need to have some kind of structure to get you to where you're going. And innovation and creativity is going to help you lead better results, right? And so integrating all of those things, this is a great skill set and tool to have. And so for us, this is why we want to give more resources. We're trying to integrate it into our curriculum and create a lot of resources for it. And so we've got a website that we'll plug and we'll share in the resources. Where we've got a toolkit for educators that are teaching the model in a variety of ways. But I'm curious, how has your experience with the Michigan model changed your perspective on leadership or your experience as a student?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I'm super excited that you asked it. So, actually, this year, and kind of on your point, talking about integrating it into the curriculum at Ross, this year I'm serving as a teaching assistant for our Business Administration 100 course for our freshmen. And in that capacity, I sit in class twice a week, I take attendance, I help grade assignments, I generally just serve as a guide for these freshmen as they're navigating their first year at Ross. And we actually had a Sanger leadership session in one of our classes, and we talked all about the Michigan model of leadership. And also, the students actually got quizzed on it in their first quiz as well, which was super fun. But I think for me, seeing the Michigan model of leadership spearheaded from the ground up at Ross was something that was truly exciting and special for me as a student. I had previous experience being a Sanger ambassador and knowing what the model was, but now seeing it integrated into the curriculum at Ross, especially starting just as freshmen, is something super exciting and something that students can kind of come in and see, where they lie on what quadrant and how they can use those quadrants and what they're excelling at maybe now and pinpoint areas that they might need to have growth moments for through the rest of their career at Ross. And so I think, just being able to talk about it with freshmen, especially already having kind of that broad-based understanding of what the model is and where I lied on the model, it was important to take a step back and allow them and give them that time to really take the assessment, understand what their strengths were and what their values were, and then understand, how they can use the resources at the University of Michigan to help grow their leadership styles over time. And it'll be interesting to see. And I really hope that Ross and other schools follow suit, but I hope Ross kind of integrates this into a senior year course as well and has students retake it in the future to see, what they've improved on over time. I think that would be an interesting application to have for the business school.
That's our hope and that's our plan.
Yes.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm curious, though, as you talked about the first year students who are taking this experience in the course, like how did you feel like it was received from the students?
I think really well, honestly. And it was also right after all of our finance discussions. So I think all the students were like, yay, I get to learn what I value and everything. But honestly, I think for them, they'd never really had an opportunity to just going back to that reflection piece, actually sit down and understand what their values are and what they're good at. And so I think they really enjoyed of being oh, I had no idea maybe my strengths geared more towards, developing meaningful relationships with people or, using my curiosity to drive meaningful results. So I think being able to reflect on those for each of the students was really impactful. And what I saw actually a lot of students doing too is they were using different pieces in the quadrants and connecting them to different organizations or career paths or, different teams that they could get involved in at Michigan and how their strengths actually might resonate with some of those organizational cultures that they could get involved in. So I thought that was another interesting, applicable piece. And a lot of them actually drew out kind of a map of here's my quadrant, here's what I'm excelling at, here are some organizations that have some of those similar pieces, whether they value collaboration, and here's how I can get involved with an organization that is something that I'm already excelling at with regards to their culture. So I thought that was really interesting. And what I would do is I'd go around and say, what are the areas you might not be excelling at, and how can you use other organizations or resources on campus to further develop those over time. So I was kind of playing devil's advocate a little bit in my role as a TA, but I think that applicability piece was really awesome to see and come before my eyes too, even as a junior watching a freshman. I was oh my goodness, you're already planning things out and seeing, what might work with your specific values. And I think that value matching piece was something truly magical to see even from students who are just starting their time at Michigan.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're talking about is that this assessment provides a snapshot, one moment in time, and we do change and evolve, right? So
exactly.
This experiences that you're having, we like to say the best way to lead is by doing, right? And so by doing, we get greater data and information about how we lead that helps us to determine what could we do different. So the Michigan model of leadership is a great living resource that it's always there, always fundamentally stays true to the kind of leader we hope to develop. but you evolve.
Right.
And so your plan to continue that evolving process,
Yeah.
is really important for a leader, that they don't stand still in their development. They're not saying this is my style and I'm not moving from it. It's no, you have strength in one area, you can grow in others, but over time you might have skill set that you didn't even dream of having because of an opportunity that you had.
Yeah. And I love the action-based learning piece as well. And I think that's something that Michigan specifically prides themselves on. And to your point of, you really learn by doing. And I think me as a junior looking back at my freshman year, like my Michigan model of leadership assessment results would have looked drastically different to now. And the amount of leadership opportunities that I've had now freshman year and now going into my, midway through my junior year has been drastically different. So I've been able to exercise and flex those muscles and gain new skills, with regards to that, driving results from the crisis challenge or providing more structure from my Ross Retail Club experiences. I've been able to garner and gain those skills. And so I think that's another important piece and really shows, how important it is to really check up on these things and reflect, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier. But I'm kind of curious, I guess, about what specific programs or resources Sanger specifically can offer to help students kind of start their journey with the Michigan model of leadership.
Yeah, so I think the first is that self-assessment, right? So that self-assessment is available right now on our website. It's a free assessment that's, self-identify where your natural skill sets and abilities are. And so that's really a tool to help you gain that foundation. From there, it's really like I said, choose your own adventure. We have the Sanger Leadership Journey, which is a 5-step framework. We have a leader development plan, as you were talking about the students in the first year class experience. What's my long-term goal? What are the things that are going to help me get there? What are the behaviors and skill sets I need to help grow? And then what we are really excited about, and we're the first center at any business school to have one, is an evidence-based leader behavior encyclopedia. And so what that is, it's designed to help students, researchers identify evidence-based leader behaviors from top scholarly journals. And so what we do is we've taken research from top journals and we've put it sort of in an index to help people filter from a variety of categories. So you could search team, individual, organization. You could search all of our behaviors. So if you want to get better at curiosity or empathy or influence or developing efficiency in an organization, you can search by that. You can also search by the quadrants of the model. And so what this does is if a student is wanting to get better at a certain area, this gives them ideas for what is the research saying you can do to actually get better at it, helping students drive better experiments for implementing learning. And then from there, all of our programs are open to all students at the University of Michigan. So although, we're housed at the business school, at the Ross School of Business, any student at the University of Michigan can participate, experience this. We're rolling out some plans to collaborate with all of our schools and colleges and units across the university to have sort of this adoption of this model if it's helpful to a student, a team, an organization. And so we get a lot of one-off requests about, can you run this thing? We have created a whole suite of resources that will soon, I hope be up on our website. But right now we have a Canvas page. So if you want access to that Canvas page, you can reach out to us on our website. We can certainly grant you access, especially if you're an educator, a leadership educator that teaches leadership to students or learners in any way. This is a great opportunity to do it. And I'll say what I think is really neat is, we're talking about students, we're talking about individuals, but our executive education team at the Ross School of Business engages in the same content, right? So our corporate executives are thinking about this at the same way. They're just looking at it from an organizational level. How might my organization be more efficient, be more stronger? How do I develop a culture? And so we've got a whole host of executive education programs that help leaders and learners and corporate executives help diagnose this change in culture in their teams as well. So that's a little bit about what's next. We've got this resource creation. We're creating this podcast. We're thinking about adoption across various levels. But I'm curious for you, Bizzy, what are your hopes for the future of the model of how students continue to use it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and something that's super exciting. I was getting like goosebumps, I think, when you were sharing a little bit about how it's spreading and, the next steps for the Michigan model of leadership. But I think for me specifically, especially seeing like the benefits from a student perspective, I just love to broaden the breadth and reach of the model to a bunch of other students on campus at Michigan. I think, to your point, it's been widely used within Ross, and I think I know how it's getting like applied to our freshman course right now. Like I said earlier, would love to have it, have students reassess during their senior year, maybe even like sophomore or junior year as like a start, middle, endpoint assessment throughout their undergraduate career. I think also just applying it to other colleges and students across Michigan at large. All my roommates have different majors, and so I think I talk to them frequently about how they're engaging in group projects or doing different assignments that go into each of these quadrants where they're using innovation and curiosity or they're needing to provide structure on teams. And I think that widely applicable mindset of the model of leadership is so important. And I think just being able to have it broadly applied at Michigan at large would be kind of something super cool and exciting to see as I'm coming into my senior year. I talked a little bit with Jeff about this earlier, but I'd love to see it actually used before students get into the University of Michigan as freshmen. There's a bunch of onboarding modules that we have to do before we actually start our time at Michigan. And so having the Michigan model of leadership assessment as a part of that onboarding, I think would be really neat, as well as, again, like a senior offboarding kind of module before people graduate. And then obviously widely would love to expand to a bunch of other schools, whether starting Big Ten schools and then expanding across the nation would be kind of more long-term, high-level strategic goal. But, and obviously, spreading that maize and blue spirit across the United States as well. But overall, I think kind of starting, making it a little bit more structured and normalized in the business school, spreading across the colleges and units at Michigan, and then overall spreading to different Big Ten schools and around the nation to really inspire the Michigan model of leadership and the values that it holds for students.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I want to just end with, two fundamental things about what we believe, our philosophy towards leader development based on a couple of assumptions. One, as I stated, is that leadership it's like reading. It's like math. It compromises skills and behaviors that anybody can learn, right? And so I want to just stand still by that, is that regardless of where you're at, you can learn this skill. You can learn all of these skills that we were talking about today. And then secondly is that developing as a leader is this lifelong journey, right? And so that's why I love this work, because I feel like I'm always learning, where you make the most progress there when you have a growth orientation, you have that growth mindset, you have clear goals, you run intentional experiments, and you accept that feedback, those failures, right? And you continue to ask for feedback. So I just wanted to say that because I think it's important to say, whoa, this all feels really overwhelming. Where do I begin? I think it starts with an awareness of who am I and do I have an eagerness to learn and to grow and to get better. This tool is for you. And so I want to just invite folks who are listening to, if you really enjoyed this or want to learn more, please check out our website, sanger.umich.edu. A lot of folks also follow us on a variety of social media platforms. You can follow us on X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and we're also revamping our YouTube page. So lots of ways to engage. And Bizzy, thank you for the conversation. I'm really excited to have had it, and I'm really looking forward for folks to continue to engage with this work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff, and super excited to be a part of this and Sanger Leadership Center as well, and would encourage anyone to look into the Michigan model of leadership and see how it can apply to your career or role as a student going forward, because it's been super beneficial to me as a student, and I look forward to continuing to use it in my lifelong journey of leadership as well. So thank you, Jeff, so much for your time, and so incredibly grateful to be here.
Yeah, thanks again. All right, well, take care. Go Blue.
Go Blue.
That brings us to the end of this episode, but your reflection on the topic doesn't have to end here. make sure you visit our website at mlead.umich.edu/breakaway. There, you will find the discussion questions as well as more information about our guests. You'll also find more episodes in the series there. Please don't forget to leave feedback wherever you listen to podcasts. And finally, on behalf of the Michigan Leadership Collaborative, please take care of yourselves. Thank you for listening, and go Blue.